Hello, and welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs a Therapy, the podcast where two mental health professionals talk about their mental health journeys and how they navigate mental wellness while working in the mental health field. I'm your host, Jeremy Schumacher, licensed marriage family therapist. I have a therapy guest today that I'm super stoked to talk with. I saw them at a symposium recently. If you are a regular listener, I talked about the symposium a month and a half ago. And this therapist was one of the collaborators to the keynote, which was really awesome. Today, I am joined by Mario Ismael Espinoza. Mario, thanks for...
My internet is somehow just glitched, and I heard you introduce me. And I don't know if you asked a question or if you just want me to say hi.
Just saying hi, just introducing you. Welcome. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I just added the preamble that I got to see you at the symposium in New York. And so that was where we first connected. So not someone in my local community, but out on the East Coast doing therapy out there. For all of my guests, I start with the same question, which is, how is it that you came to be in the mental health field?
Okay, cool. Do you want the long story or the medium story?
Yeah, whichever.
Okay, cool. So I guess I'll start with the medium story. So my previous career was in the performing arts. I was a professional contemporary ballet dancer for greater part of my youth and adulthood, young adulthood, I guess. And the company that I danced before I retired from the stage was a dance company that did a lot of community outreach and community engagement. And that community engagement took us to the Central Valley of California, where we were working with incarcerated youth. And that was, as a dancer, going into, like high security facilities with adolescents was really impactful. I was in my early 30s when we were going to do movement workshops with incarcerated youth, and I was faced with a lot of adolescents that looked a lot like me. Everybody was, I would say 99% of the incarcerated youth were Hispanic or Mexican immigrants, Latinx. I don't know what terminology they would use to identify themselves, but they looked a lot like me. I'm a shorter brown person with like dark skin and dark hair, and so that was really hard. That was really hard work. As a dancer, I went in there in my dance clothes, feeling really jazzed, and like I saw these youth looking at me like, "What are you doing here? Like, what's all of this, fancy footwork you're trying to do?" But yeah, to stick to the medium's version of the story, it was really impactful. And following the workshops, we had to go and put on our makeup and clothes and dance and perform.
Yeah.
And the transition was really hard, as you can imagine. Emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, it was really tough to go from working with these folks to performing for their parents who were free and able to attend. And I was like, oof. There is unfortunately, the people that were supporting us as dancers were not able to support that transition. And that's what sort of became my calling. I was like, oh, I want to be able to support dancers, artists that are doing really tough work. And I want to be there for that transition when they're doing something and then they go on the stage. And now I'm basically supporting dancers that they make similar transitions, but from the stage to off the stage. And so we can get into more of the weeds of that if you want. But that's how I came to the mental health field. It was those experiences that informed me that I wanted to be part of dancers' lives.
Was that something that was throughout your career as a dancer, or was that something you came to later, something you sort of stumbled your way into? How did that sort of come about?
The knowing that I wanted to do social work in the field of mental health.
Yeah, and I guess like doing some of those workshops and having different people who you were working with that you were like, oh, hey, there's a need here.
Yeah, I think it was it became apparent as you know, as I quickly approached the end of my performance career. Um, I also at that time, so we did these workshops for many years, and I didn't know that that's something that I was going to be called to do until towards the end of my career, and that also coincided with me starting to see a therapist for support not related to that career transition. But then yeah, I worked with an LCSW, and I was like, oh, social workers can do therapy, cool. And then I was
Yeah.
like, oh, social workers in the incarcerate, you know, in like in the carceral system, and social workers in the mental health system, and I was like, oh, there's the bridge, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm putting you on the spot here. What in your experience is sort of the idea around mental health in the dance community? I come from a parallel but different background in sports psych, and it really is, you get those sort of old macho toughness, rub some dirt on it types. And when I was working in sports psych, sort of seeing the shift where mental health became really important and valued in the sports sort of world. I'm wondering sort of what's the vibe around mental health in the dance community.
I'll speak from my experience and the population that I work with, and you know, dance is such a huge field. And there's so many different styles of dance, and every style and genre of dance has its own culture, right?
Yeah.
Because the ballet world has a different culture than the modern contemporary world, and has a different culture from the street dance and hall dance. You know, so like dance is the biggest umbrella term
Yeah.
that we could probably use today, or probably parallel to mental health, right? So I work specifically with like stage performers that include like ballet, you know, folks that dance on a proscenium stage, and also people that perform like musical theater, dancers that work in musical theater. So this is the small um, population that I work with. And you know what I can say about where we're at, because I'm part of that community, where we're at in terms of mental health, it's still not seen as preventative services, and that's the mountain that I'm like trying to climb right now. I'm like, how do I get folks to remember that mental health is also preventative medicine? You
Yeah.
know, how do I get folks to come to me before they need me? How do I get folks to like seek out yeah, assistance before things hit that crisis, you know, mode. um so yeah, that's how I can answer that question.
Yeah. Is that, again, speaking from your experience, is that a shift from when you started dance as a younger person earlier in your career, sort of where it was seen?
Totally. I don't remember ever consider, like, the first time I heard about therapy was in college, because the coolest person that I know was like, oh, I'm gonna go see my therapist, and I was like, only cool people see therapy. I'm not cool enough to see a therapist
Yeah.
yet. And so yeah, in my, you know, the 17 years that I performed, mental health was not something we were talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel similar to that, playing sports in college myself in the mid 2000s. Like nobody was talking about mental health. Like it just wasn't. I was a psych student, right? I knew I was going to go do therapy, but nobody was talking about it in that other world I was a piece of, where, then in the late 2010s, even working in higher ed, for sure, working with like young college students, the fact that we were talking about mental health and trying to do some preventative care was like a big perk for especially the parents, I would say, more than the athletes themselves. The parents were like, oh, nice, you're doing mental health. That will benefit my kid.
Mhm.
Maybe more than the buy-in was from the athletes themselves. But then the culture of athletes and coaches and the people who are actually on teams, I found to still be sort of, I'll say, a little behind the times, depending on the sport, especially.
Yeah, I get that.
I don't know a ton about dance other than like I saw Black Swan when it came out, and there's that idea of like, and that's just part of what you do, and you're supposed to sort of power through. So is that? I assume that's an oversimplification of sort of the culture.
It is, and it does touch on a lot of different themes that are based in the dancer's lived experience, but it certainly is like a flattened out, theatrical version. But yeah, there's definitely some interesting themes that we could discuss if you want. I think I would be really interested to talk about like the overlap between sports psychology and like dancer psychology, even though we don't have. And again, this is probably not going to happen in my lifetime, but if I had several lifetimes, I probably would like begin that journey of like, I don't know, creating or collaborating with others to create a field of mental health specifically for dancers, because as dancers, we start a lot of the, fortunate and privileged dancers that have a professional career start really young. They start in their formative years. Some folks start as early as 6. My sister has a child who started at 2.5. And so like their whole developmental, process takes place in front of a mirror, so there's so much there. And so I would love, I would love to see love to see the field like recognize and acknowledge that the lived experience of a dancer is different than like, I'm thinking about the populations that I work with: singers, dancers, actors, musicians. The dancer's mind works so different, even though there's a lot of overlap, but there's some very specific messaging that we get as dancers. And for that reason, I think it'd be great if we could specialize specifically with this population.
Well, I have to imagine part of your work is when your body is injured or breaking down, because when I would get referrals for athletes is almost always when they were injured. There's a huge component of performance-based stuff. So when you're not playing well, but a lot of it is movement, that structure, practice, being with your team, being with your coaches, your mentors is part of your mental health. And when you're hurt, you can't do that. And then your mental health crashes because you're used to having the structure that isn't there anymore, and you're used to the support system that isn't there anymore. But I think the big difference, I would imagine, again, not working with a ton of dancers, former dancers who then played volleyball, which is what I coach. But different than sport is dance is also performance. And so it's not win or lose. It's not a competition. It's you are controlling a lot more. And so your performance is really up to you in a way that I think the sports world is a little bit more, we'll get them next time, champ. Because sometimes a team that's better than you, there are variables that are outside of your control, where I imagine with dance are more hyper focused on performance.
Yeah, I'll just like plug in there that I run a support group for injured dancers quarterly. And yeah, the community element of it is super important. And when you were talking about maybe what differentiates I guess my mind state on what differentiates an athlete from a performing artist, even the performing artist, we are advocating for to be recognized as athletes. But I think that there's a benefit to keeping us. I think that we want to be identified as athletes because they make so much more money than we do, and because they get so much respect and admiration than dancers do. But I think that there's a really great benefit of owning and grounding ourselves in our identity as dancers. I think that a part that becomes really challenging, that might be a little bit different, is the age part. Like dancers have to retire, or you find dancers retiring at a much younger age. So the span of our career is really jammed into very few years, and that, as you know, like the recovery process from an injury, whether it's a sprain or a broken limb or something, it's like incredibly slow, and our career goes by so fast. And that's one of the things that I find is one of the biggest challenges, right, for performing artists, is the having to slow down at a speed of plant growth. That's chaotic in the world that moves super fast.
Well, and starting so young, right? And so not having a fully developed brain, you're having these different developmental milestones while this is a huge part of your identity. And then that identity ends early if your career is so short. What do you do when what you've devoted your life to ends in your mid to early 20s?
Well, I think that's what that's one of the things that us mental health providers can, and I encourage mental health providers to consider, is to maybe explore that more, because I think it's specifically the identity part. When you name that our identity ends with our career, I think I think that's a big. It leaves a lot of room for a lot of mental health issues. I'm a 44-year-old person, and I will always identify as a dancer, even if I never step on that stage again, even if I never take a ballet class or dance class again, because it made me. It informs my work ethic. It informs my body dysmorphia. It informs so many different things that I can't get rid of. So it's always going to be part of my identity.
Do you see that though? Because again, I worked with college age students who were not going to go pro. And so when I saw them, that was the end of their sports career. And depending on the sport, started playing when they're 4 or 5 years old, basketball, baseball, some of those sports start real young, specialize in it, play at a high level, and then it's done. And then like what? And again, not saying that that's how I identify those people, but like I got a lot of identity questions of like, what am I without this thing that I've done all the 20 years I've been alive?
Yeah. And how did you address
it? I think different for different people. Again, conveniently at the college level, there's always this next jumping off point. What's the next chapter? We're closing the chapter on college. What's next? And so there was often a natural transition. I think what was most difficult is when an athlete ended on an injury. It's their last year of eligibility, or they're going to graduate and they tore their ACL, and then they're ending earlier than they expected to, and that sort of natural transition doesn't get to happen. Again, I was coaching and teaching and doing mental health. So we're saying like, it's okay. Everybody has these different identities. We're multiple parts, all of us. And so just because you're done playing, I played in college and I have never played more competitively than that. And I still play. So that doesn't mean you're done being an athlete. It just looks different. But I think it is one of those things that we as professionals in our various fields need to be aware of these kids who are specializing in a thing early in their development, like that does get deeply tied to their identity, and that can be really wonderful and lovely, or it could be really limiting if we don't expand upon that at all, if we're not intentional about how we're teaching some of that.
I would say, and I think it's both. It's a source of strength, and it's also something that can be really limiting. And I think for that, and because of that reason, I believe it's really important to keep to. I don't like the language that I'm going to use, but I'm going to use it anyway. To maintain, to keep, to stay in the ownership of that identity, only to draw out the strengths within that. Because if we lose it completely, if we only see it as something that is limiting, then we lose out. We throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think that this is that terminology I think that it also applies to our conversation about spirituality, which may happen another time. But I think that this throwing the baby out with the bathwater, saying feels really appropriate when we get rid of an identity. We also lose a lot of the strengths that come with that. Or if we only see it as a limiting identity, then we're not seeing the whole of it.
Yeah. And I don't know, I'm guessing there's overlap. You can let me know your thoughts on this, but I think sports work really well for development because they teach us so many valuable lessons that we can use throughout our life. Like, it's a silly little game we're playing, and we learn so much about teamwork, interacting with other people, overcoming hardship, what our role is on a team. Like, there's so much usable stuff that you can learn as a part of that community. Again, I think there's a really healthy outcome, and I see lots of bad coaches and mentors who don't approach it that way. But it can be this really grounding, really wonderful experience, launching off point for people into the plethora that is their adult identity.
Yeah, totally. And I think for us as clinicians and therapists and people that walk with folks in their mental health journey, it gives us so many reference points, right? Like a person's relationship to their body is going to be really largely informed by how they took care of it or how their body responded when they were young, right? And so that relationship with the body gets established really early, and it continues to evolve, but sometimes the relationship to the body doesn't evolve. And so that makes it really, I don't know, I think it gives us, again, a really fertile, like, exploring ground as therapists to be like, okay, so tell me about your upbringing. Tell me about what did you learn about your body when you were an athlete? How did you take care of it then? How did it respond? How is that different now that you're a different age?
Yeah. Yeah. So how does that sort of work with the work you do now, doing somatic-based work, body-based work? Like, is that a really easy, natural transition for a lot of your clients, or is that like foreign territory because they're used to sort of using their body for a specific outcome?
I think it varies obviously from person to person. One of the things that I find myself, it's I don't know how this translates to sports, but like dancers on stage, dancers in the rehearsal space are amazing. They're brilliant. They think quickly, they move quickly, they are able to change like from fast to slow. They're incredibly versatile. They arrive on time, and they're so resourced. And as soon as they're injured and they're not on stage, they have no resources. All of those resources feel so inaccessible to them.
Yeah.
And that feels like so much of the work that I do is reminding them and reconnecting them with those resources that they have, because when they're on stage, they're invincible. When dancers are performing, they will never reach out to me. It's only when they stop moving that all of the things that felt possible when they were performing feel impossible. So I'm like, okay, how do we bring that like amazing celestial, like, embodied person from the stage out to the streets of New York?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I've only been to New York the one time, so this is more of a touristy question of me. Is there, because there's so many different ways, like I'm in Milwaukee, right? People who aren't from the US know Chicago. They don't know Milwaukee, right? Like that's my locus point. And theater is, people travel. We get big shows in Milwaukee. We're like a sort of second tier city. But the arts community is very small, and to think about professionals, whether it's musicians or the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra, it's really the only exception I can think of. Like there's not a big community here for artists working in New York, being where there's Broadway, where there are shows, where there are theaters, like it's a big part of the community. Is that a really good resource? Does that come with its own sort of I don't know if it's issues or like, I'm going to say toxic stuff. I'm approaching it from a sports background where, again, like pockets of the community are lovely and wonderful and pockets of the community are really harmful. But like, is New York sort of a unique fertile ground for that community because it's New York?
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that. I really
Like, I
don't.
work in New York. I don't know. It's just normal here.
Yeah, I mean, yes, there's a lot of things that are really wonderful. There's also a lot of things that are really harmful, as you named. I think, yeah, having those many that number of avenues for folks to be also increases the number of folks that want to be in it. So there's a lot of like competition, as you know, and there's a lot of like, we're around people all the time, but there's also a lot of isolation in large numbers. And that's, again, only looking at the catastrophe of it, because I don't work with folks who are really, who are doing really great. They don't reach out to me. And again, this is my messaging of like preventative services. Like, do you access it before you need it?
Right.
But I also want to plug there that like the support group that for injured dancers that I work with is a national program. So it's not therapy, it's not group therapy. So because of that, we're able to offer it like nationwide. And
on like a peer support model.
Yes, like that.
Yeah, love it. Very cool. We'll link to that in the show notes. We'll do the plugs at the end, but also right now while we're talking about it. One of the other things that we sort of overlap in our work is perhaps from different perspectives again, but talking about spirituality and working with that for folks. I think Similarly, the segue I didn't want to follow too early in our conversation was, again, the identity piece. I work with a lot of people who are dealing with religious trauma and have been harmed, whether it's a religious that they were brought up in or a cult that they joined or were coerced into or whatever. So I see a lot of people who are leaving and, again, doing a lot of that identity work of when that community or when that belief system sort of falls apart. What does rebuilding look like? What are the pieces we want to keep with us? What are the pieces we need to shift and or let go of? But also working, that's also a population you work with on things like spirituality and what a healthy version of that can look like.
Well, I wanted to say that this is a journey that I just recently started professionally. Personally, I had my journey, which is much longer, but only now actually I'm about to finish my like certification course on spirituality and social work. And I took this course to figure out or try to understand, like, how do I incorporate it? How do I incorporate spirituality in a clinical practice? And the answers are slowly revealing there's no like single one way of doing it, right? And which is super frustrating. I wish there was.
Yes.
I run a different support group also, and this support group is not solidified. It's not something that happens every year, but it's for my colleague Jamie named it the Gendertainers. So it's for folks that are gender expansive in the entertainment industry. And again, it's peer support model. But yeah, that's one of the things that's one of the shared experiences that a lot of queer and gender expansive trans people have, is that, you know, we do have really challenging, sometimes traumatic experiences in organized religion or spiritual spaces. And we end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which to me, again, is losing access to protective factors, right? And so that's why I'm like, oh, I want to know how to bring it in, because I know that I have my own personal spiritual practices that have been really instrumental to healing. And I also want to know, well, what does it look like to bring, you know, spiritually sensitive content to the practice?
Yeah. I think it's, you know, I say this often in therapy, humans in mass are very predictable. Humans on an individual basis are nearly impossible to predict. There's just that high degree of variability with who's sitting across from you in the room. But in my work, seeing and my lived experience too, right? Like I was raised in a high control religion, fundamentalist, evangelical, sort of wrestling with my own neurodivergence, which I was diagnosed later in life, wrestling with my own queerness, which I came out later in life. And also then like the religious trauma piece, having to do my own work in therapy, having to understand all of those multiple pieces before I could even like go back to school and study it more. So I wasn't bringing my own stuff into the room. But like, yeah, I think it is in my office. So many people are like, ugh, I use the word like ritual, and I'll see them like tense up because again, if you are harmed in, you know, I'm in the Midwest, so like Catholic or Protestant is the big sort of spaces I see. But like if you were harmed in a religious setting, that word ritual has all this like negative connotation. But rituals are not organized religion's creation. Humans have been doing rituals for as long as we've been around. Like that's a very experience. And so how do we sort of like hold space for that? How do we honor that? How do we find an authentic version of that that isn't dogmatic or harmful?
You know, it makes me think about a conversation. So one of the spiritual practices that I'm a part of is curanderismo, right? Which is this sort of like it's a Mesoamerican spirituality and healing practice that is used in like, you know, the borderlands of Mexico and the United States, and like it's called by different things if you go to different places. But I was doing this, I guess, a presentation on this. Yeah, I'll call it a presentation. So I was talking to therapists who take a spiritually sensitive approach to clinical practice, and I was presenting them, you know, the 4 directions, and I was like, in this direction we have we have these energies and like these symbols and the name, the masculine and the feminine. And some therapists got really tight when I was like talking about masculinity and femininity, and like the assignment of like one direction having masculine energy and or feminine energy. And I didn't know how to address it then, because I was more concerned about the tension in their bodies than the that what we were talking
Yeah.
about. It was only after the session, after the presentation, I guess, when the question came up for me, and I was like, I wonder whose definition of masculine they're using to understand this material. I wonder whose definition of femininity they're using to understand this material. Because if a person understands ritual from that, sort of like organized religion sense, then the relationship with the word is going to be impacted by that. And so then my work, I feel like our work can consist of like reclaiming language, right? Reclaiming any word that feels like it could be useful, or finding words that could take that place. But like from a social justice perspective, I'm like, no, let's take that word back. Let's redefine that word, and like let's not let their definition be the only definition of ritual, masculinity, femininity that we have access to.
Yeah. And that process of meaning making, is so cool. I get so excited when I get to do that with clients, but like it's really scary at first. Like if you're used to something having meaning because you were taught that it had meaning, like letting go of that, or even untangling that, pulling on those threads and being like, oh, somebody else just like picked this and then it got handed down. But it can be this empowering practice when you realize like, yeah, you can make your own rituals. You can decide how you want to define some of these words. Like, what does it feel like in your body when we're doing some of this stuff? How do you resonate with it? And I think that's like this really lovely experience. And I'm always reminded that like, it feels really lovely at this point in my journey, but it's scary at first. Usually there's a lot of work to do that. Like, it's empowering.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you remember, like, what are some words that are synonymous to to some of the words that could be useful in like rituals, or if other words that clients feel more comfortable or less activated by.
I think a lot of people sort of talk about practice. I don't like the word habit. That's my bias, but a lot of my clients do like habits, because ritual feels, I don't know. I still use ritual, like, right? I sort of identify as an atheistic, pagan sort of approach, earth revering sort of space. So like, but we'll talk about what's sacred, right? If we don't like the word ritual, then what's sacred? And then how do we maybe have a practice or a relationship with the sacred, right? Again, if ritual's uncomfortable or habits uncomfortable, what's our relationship with it? How is lighting a candle, reading a book, having your morning coffee without interruption, whatever that thing might be, how do we sort of hold space for that? And then again, like an added complex layer is like, what does spirituality potentially look like? But I like to start with, how do we define what's sacred? Because I think, again, that can be so empowering to realize, oh, what's sacred for me is up to me.
I love that. That's beautiful.
But it is, I've been in the therapy field for 17 years now. This is not stuff I was taught, right? Like doing my own work and continuing to grow and change, not only as a person, but as a therapist, like trying to connect with people who are doing decolonizing work, trying to be on that side of therapy where like, yes, we all know the DSM sucks. Like we can complain about it, but what are we replacing it with? What else are we doing? And you talked just a bit at the symposium about two-eyed seeing. Again, I think that idea of, you said a couple times, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Like, yes, there are things we need from cultures, from indigenous communities, from some of these oral traditions that have been handed down that work well for humans because they've always worked well for humans. And blending that with modern science and some of the technology, I think I see so many people who like go to see their prescriber for 15 minutes and get put on like a medication, and that's supposed to be like wellness. And it's like, yeah, that's so sterile and that can't be healthy. We're
Mhm.
missing so much about what makes it. So I love, again, like not just what are we getting rid of, but what are we replacing it with?
Mhm. I don't think we should get rid of anything. I think that there's value. If it's there, it has a purpose. And how we utilize it and the harm that we can cause with it, that's what we need to look at. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I think that dirty water can, water plants maybe. I don't know, depending on what's dirty with, or maybe we can like leave it out in the sun to evaporate, or I don't know. That's my initial inclination is to not get rid of the DSM-5. Let's learn with it. Let's notice how
Yeah,
it's changed. Let's notice how people utilize it. And also, what are some alternative resources? I think that psychotropic medication can be so useful for some folks and really
yeah,
bad for some other folks. And like Luis Malmadrona, who is the person that I learned about two-eyed seeing with, um, was talking about praying to our medicine before we take it, whatever our
mhm,
medicine is, whether it's cannabis, whether it's um, I don't know, heart pressure medication, whatever it
yeah,
is, right? Like, what's our relationship with it, and do we? Yeah, that relational part of it feels really important, and for that reason, I'm like, yeah, let's not throw anything away. Let's learn with it, and then when we realize that we're not using it anymore, let's not hoard it, right? But if it's still
right.
useful, if we're still using it and it's useful for some, let's keep it and let's add more to it. And then just like certain things that are not used that end up becoming obsolete on their own, like let's watch and let's respect that. Let's respect those things that are no longer useful and what is the word? I'm thinking about who's the author of Hospicing Modernity? Um, Vanessa, the last name is escaping me, but like,
Yeah,
yes,
we'll find it. We'll put it in the show notes.
yeah, what's our relationship to those things that are dying, and how can we like help them die in a dignified way?
Hmm. Yeah, and that there's utility, there's use for these things, even if that use isn't for us individually, that it exists for someone.
And like the responsibility that we have as people with power, right? Licensed power, the power of a license, the power to prescribe or to diagnose. Like that's a lot of responsibility. How do we ensure and how are we constantly assessing for the harm that we have potential to do?
Yeah, 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 and because again, like you're saying, some of this stuff is, I think the DSM sucks in a lot of different ways, and work with late diagnosed neurodivergent folks. When I say you're on the spectrum, there's stigma and there's other things we have to work through, but like, oh, I'm not lazy, I'm not bad or wrong, my brain's not broken, this is just how I'm wired and it's how I've
Mhm.
always been wired. Like that's such a healing conversation to have because now we understand it in a different way. um,
Mhm.
and then like being aware of our modern times, like RFK wants to put autistic people in work camps, so like there's a we need to be aware of some of still the problems of our systems, and what power can be used to do, like you're saying, the harm that it can be done in that. Um, what was your experience? I know you're saying some of this is informed by your personal experience, but um, studying at like the Ackerman Institute, which is like a big name in the therapy world, if you're sort of informed, like how do you feel like your training prepared you for what you actually work with now?
Mm. Yeah, in a lot of different ways, because I did my second year internship at Ackerman, and then I also worked as a clinic therapist after I graduated.
Yeah.
And Scipio Small was the one of the Scipio and Lori Kaplan and other folks started the diversity and social work, which is a program that, and I believe that it recently ended, which is a huge loss. But basically, it brought in people of color to do family therapy, and yeah, it brought and Scipio was this statuesque, huge, like personality, like big as heart, spirit, and he's the first person, and it's so cool. Like he probably brought more spirituality into the clinical practice than any other clinician that I know without really intending to. I don't think that he would call himself a spiritual practitioner, but he was the first person to say, like, you don't choose your clients choose you. Your clients will find you. Like, you keep walking in the way that you're walking, and other people are going to join you. I'm using my own words, but that's how I received it. And yeah, thinking about, systems theory and how that applies to clinical practice totally informs the way that I work with, like, people, younger people, right? Like, I worked in a high school for 2 years, and yeah, we tried to do all these interventions at, like, the child level without thinking about all these other systems, like the parent level, the community level that are, that impacts them. So the work, the Ackerman training and what they teach was really, it opened my eyes to systemic thinking in a way that I'm super grateful.
Yeah.
And I'll say also that I learned that the hardest work a therapist can do is family therapy. And to compound that, family therapy with immigrant or marginalized populations is the hardest work. Whenever I meet, like, a really confident clinician, I'm like, go into that field. Like, go into that field, really apply yourself there, because I think that is truly the heaviest lift there is in the mental health field.
Yeah, and compounded now by all the current politics and policies, the pawns of immigrant families that the current administration is doing horrific harm to.
And those populations have been harmed for as long as there's been systems. This administration is just showing us in a much more public way, but it's always, these families have always been targeted and disenfranchised and excluded.
Yeah, there is, I talk pretty regularly on the podcast. My first internship was at a homeless shelter. And we talk about sort of the both and of that was really great for me to learn. And I was so vastly underqualified to be helping those people who had a degree of need that I was not trained or able to address. And so it is one of those things. I like the decolonizing work that's happening. And again, some spaces of the therapy world where, like, yes, it's not just how do we keep this one individual in our office healthy, but how do we keep families healthy? How do we keep communities healthy? Like, how do we not just, like, keep functioning, but how do we actually, like, have space to thrive? What's the environment that we need to support for that to happen? Because I think, again, so long it was just like diagnosis, medication, go back to work. You're doing great because you're doing your 9 to 5. And, like, that is just so lifeless in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and it's really hard work, but it's so important work, right? Like, and I think it's really great that you started there, because that probably influenced so much of what your path looked like that followed that. You probably learned about all the things that you needed to learn about, which is probably, a great, it's a hard way to learn, but it's probably a great thing to be exposed to.
And again, like, being trained in systems thinking, like, I love it. And it's also, like, the bane of my existence, because when you see the systems that are failing people and you see it not as individual fault, but somebody who's dealing with the symptom of a broken system, working with immigrant families, working with people who, I'm a millennial, so I see a lot of millennials, a lot of women who have chronic health issues that have been misdiagnosed or, like, just not studied for some reason. In America, we don't understand menopause in any sense of the word. Like, I'm sorry, your doctor sucks. I'm sorry, the healthcare industry sucks. Like, as a systems thinker, I think it's ongoing work that, like, we keep bumping into these broken systems.
Yeah, and, like, the labor of having to zoom in and zoom out, right, for us as therapists and as people that walk with folks in their healing journey. Like, there's so much zooming into the micro and zooming out into, these other fields to try to understand the context, but still be able to meet the folks. It's really important work.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, you mentioned the support group earlier. Like, that's why I do love peer support. That's what I do for a lot of the religious trauma that I work, is trying to not set it up as therapy that we need a therapist to do, but as peer support, because, again, like, there's more people who need the resources than resources available. So thinking outside of that, like, box of here's what code I need for insurance reimbursement and how else can we give people good information, how else can we reach people and help them is really needed right now.
Yeah, and that's so interesting. It makes me think about how people relate to these healing practices when we change the language, right? Going back to language, if we're calling it therapy, what's their relationship to that healing practice of being in community, and how does it shift when we call it peer support? How does it shift to when we change the language? Because hopefully my prayer is that it's always a healing process, right?
Right. Yeah. Mario, this has been lovely. I want to be respectful of your time. If people want to learn more about you, if people want to connect to some of the offerings that you have, where do they go? How do they find you?
Well, I guess my website. Yeah, I can share with you my website. That's the best way to connect with me. So my full-time job is at the Entertainment Community Fund. This is a national social service agency that works with people in the entertainment industry, and not just people in front of the stage or in front of the TV, but in front of the camera. But it's also people that support folks that support the arts. So like hair, makeup, people that clean theaters, people that take tickets, people that are setting up stages for concerts. So everybody in front and behind the scenes.
Love that.
National organizations called the Entertainment Community Fund. I'll give you the website. So that's my full-time job. And again, I work specifically with dancers and choreographers. So if there's entertainment people that that are interested in the services, and if there's dancers that are interested in the support group, they can reach out to me through that. And I also have like my private practice where I work with folks individually. I go through one of those places that allows me to take insurance. I don't know if we're going to be plugging things like that, but yeah, through my website is how people can get in touch with me directly.
Yeah, and wherever you're listening to this podcast, we'll have those links down in the show notes, so that's nice and easy. You can follow those links. Mario, thanks for being awesome at the symposium, which is where I got to meet you for the first time, but also thanks for taking the time to come on and chat a bit today.
Thanks for the invitation. Yeah, it's been nice to talk to you.
And to all our wonderful listeners, thanks for tuning in again this week. We will be back next week with a new episode. Take care, everyone.